Newly re-elected for an historic third term as president of China, Xi Jinping made his first visit outside the country, and it was to Moscow. What has turned into an unbreakable alliance, an alliance based on many historic factors, but one very important contemporary one. An alliance based on the contemporary reality that the United States is gunning for both Russia and China, if necessary, at the same time. A tall order, you might think, for a country that can't produce clean drinking water for many of its citizens. A tall order for a country where many of the banks are beginning to tumble and the others being saved by historic Herculean tasks of quantitative easing, printing more and more dollars based on less and less material economic realities. A tall order for a country that had to slink out of Afghanistan like a thief in the night, beaten by men in sandals on bicycles, carrying Kalashnikovs strung across their shoulder. But there seems no end to the appetite for war in the United States. And it's bipartisan, with the exception of Donald Trump, who probably wants to fight just one of these adversaries rather than both at the same time. And in any case, as I speak, he still faces the threat of arrest. But the Republican and Democratic leadership in the US Congress are absolutely united in maintaining a visceral hostility towards two of their competitors, one of them which happens to own a very great deal of United States debt, and one of them happens to be the place where so many of the commodities necessary for the working of European and North American capitalism are to be found. It is a tall order indeed. And so President Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow, to Vladimir Putin, 3 whole days. Their first meeting took 4.5 hours, tete-a-tete. Now, I've been around diplomacy and politics for very many decades, and that is a long meeting by anybody's standards. But they had so much to discuss on the economic level, no doubt on the military technical level, on the diplomatic level, and on the political level. And it seems that the visit was an outstanding success. Certainly, if you judge it by the excitement it has created across the world, you would have to judge it a success. Now, some in the West will be surprised to hear me calling it exciting. But you have to know that we represent just 13% of the population of the world. This is a fact I never tire of making and pointing out, but have to, because so much of our worldview is fixed upon the fallacious idea that we are the world. You'll remember that charity single, "We Are the World," that they sang out in Britain and the United States, but we really are not. The United States is 4% of the population of the world. If you take the West as a whole, and only if you define places like Australia as being in the West, which is, of course, a defiance of geography itself. And only if you exclude the obvious fact that many, many millions of the people in the West are wholly against the conduct of their own political leaders. If you don't believe me, take a look at the footage from Paris. Oh, sorry, you can't, because the Western broadcasters are not showing the fact that if there had been cameras around in 1789, that's what the French Revolution would have looked like if it had been televised. The Place de Concorde on fire. Tens, hundreds of thousands of French citizens in more or less permanent revolt against their president, who's had to declare this evening that he will not be seeking another term as president. No wonder, because he would have no chance of even winning, even against the opponent that he fought last time. If you don't believe me, you haven't been paying attention to the wave of strikes and demonstrations throughout the European continent, including in the United Kingdom itself. More people have been on strike for more days in the United Kingdom in the past 12 months than for the past 30 years. And many of those strikes are proving to be winners, and the workers being offered multiples of the money they turned down at the beginning. And the British parliamentary system is in chaos. As I mentioned right at the top, Boris Johnson has spent the day in front of a kangaroo court. Now, of course, I dislike Boris Johnson viscerally. I dislike he's a political enemy of mine. But I've been in front of kangaroo courts before. I know what they look like. And the idea that the former Prime Minister of Britain should be on trial, a trial being staged by his political enemies, and I don't mean the opposition, I mean his Conservative Party enemies, the people who ousted him from power, plus the opposition, have put him on trial all day. And what an unedifying sight it was. Some of the most pettifogging detail. One question was, your diary doesn't show where you were on a certain date and in a window of something like 20 minutes 2 years ago. Do you recall where you were? I don't know what Boris Johnson's answer was. I know what mine would have been. I couldn't account for my whereabouts in a 20-minute window last week, never mind 2 years ago. But the fact that the British political system is putting on trial its former Prime Minister over birthday parties, over cake, over wine during the pandemic is symptomatic of a much wider and deeper problem. I think Boris Johnson should be on trial in a real court for his handling of the pandemic. I think Boris Johnson should be on trial, perhaps in front of the International Criminal Court, for having wrecked the possible peace deal between Russia and Ukraine nearly 10 months ago. Emerging out of the peace process in Turkey, Joe Biden dispatched Boris Johnson to order President Zelensky of Ukraine not to sign any peace agreement, when he may very well have been minded to. That means, if you think about it, the blood of every person who has died in that 10 months is on the people that scuppered the potential peace deal. I could make that case in front of the International Criminal Court, and I'm not even a lawyer. Boris Johnson and his government are responsible for the loss of public money running into tens of billions on their track and trace, on their procurement projects and contracts, which were handed out to cronies and family members and party donors for clearly inferior material that didn't even work. One of them, a Conservative peeress, Baroness Mone, has literally yachted off to the Algarve, where she's living, in hiding, essentially, from British justice, unable to be questioned by British police for what turns out to be the alleged theft of up to £30 million in bogus procurement contracts. Bogus in the sense that she formed a company that had never performed that kind of task before, was paid a very large amount of money for it, and the taxpayer was cheated in terms of the value of the project. So we've got a member of the House of Lords hiding in the Algarve. We've got perhaps the best part of £100 billion wasted by the Conservative government, and they're quizzing Boris Johnson over birthday cake or whether he had a glass of wine in the Whitehall offices of the Prime Minister. Then there's the whole issue of whether they handled the pandemic in the right way to begin with. So I'm not here defending Boris Johnson. I'm just saying that what is happening to him is symptomatic of the malaise, like the problem of Macron, of the Western democracies, a point to which I shall turn in just a minute. But perhaps the most dramatic is the threat to arrest Donald Trump. There has never in the entire history, not just of the United States of America, but any major Western power, been the distinct probability of the last occupant of this, the most powerful office in the world, being arrested, handcuffed, fingerprinted, made to do the perp walk in front of the courtroom in downtown Manhattan. Why is it happening? Not because he described hush money to a hooker that he once had an affair with as legal fees. Can't be that, because Hillary Clinton did exactly that in the money that she spent on the Steele dossier, which launched the whole Russiagate hoax. She put it down as legal expenses, but it was actually payment for a dossier full of lies, falsehoods, misrepresentations. It's not really about the money he paid to Stormy Daniels. Come on. Neither is it about what documents he took home to Mar-a-Lago from the White House. It can't be, because all the presidents of the United States take home their work for their memoirs, or, I don't know, maybe to use it against future occupants of their office. But all of them have done it. The reason they have put, or are threatening to put, Donald Trump under arrest is because they're afraid that he's going to defeat them again in 2024. He should think himself lucky that he's not being terminated with the extreme prejudice that President John F. Kennedy. Maybe that lies in the future. The fact is, they know that there's a very real possibility that Trump, having been the last president, might also be the next one. And the difference between Trump and them is that he exposes what they really are, how they really work. His vainglory and his bluster is vulgar, but it's nonetheless an authentic expression of American exceptionalism, of manifest destiny. It is an authentic expression of the extent to which America believes not only that it rules the world, but that it deserves to and intends to continue to. Now, President Xi Jinping said some very important things in the last few days. One of the most important was on the subject of democracy. The Chinese have developed a new phrase, whole process democracy. I've been listening to it today at the conference I'm attending. It is actually quite a persuasive set of ideas. It makes the point that democracy cannot just be about form, it must also be about content. We in the West have a rococo form of democracy. In America, they elect even the local dog catcher, the sheriff, the judge, local representatives, regional representatives, national representatives, right up to the president. But what difference does it make? Two cheeks of the same backside are running for office. The Democrats and the Republicans are two sides of the same coin. You're not allowed to run for office in the United States unless you can raise vast sums of money. For president, last time, almost $2 billion to run for president. But if you are outside of the boundaries of the prevailing orthodoxy, you will be destroyed. Even if you sometimes look and sound like you are, like Trump, you will be destroyed. Even if you are the candidate of one of these two cheeks of the same backside. We have in Britain parliaments and assemblies and councils and select committees and all the rest. But what difference does it make? You cannot change things. We haven't been able to change things. We live exactly the same way, deteriorating, degenerating in every important respect as we did 40, 50 years ago. As a matter of fact, we're poorer than we were then. When my parents sent me off to school, they did so confidently in the expectation that I would have a better life than they had. But I cannot say that about my children that I send to school now, and neither can you. Nothing changes. And if, like Jeremy Corbyn, briefly the leader of the opposition, you might just change things, then again you are destroyed. The reality is, in China, you might not be able to change the party, but you can definitely change the policy. I'm here now in Beijing for the first time in 25 years. Trust me, the policy is unrecognizable today from 25 years ago. It's even more unrecognizable from what it was when I first entered Parliament, or entered politics rather, 50 years ago. Politics is a mass participation business in China. There is a constant ferment of ideas and argument, and decisions are made that really change things. So, if democracy is government of the people, for the people, by the people, who can say, really, in Western countries that they have genuinely a democracy? They have the form, but the democracy is devoid of content. There was a very great series from a book written by a friend of mine, a conservative Lord Dobb, called House of Cards. It was made into an American television serial, which I studied avidly for years. And in that series, President Francis Urquhart once turned sotto voce to the camera and said, "Democracy, it's so overrated. Our democracy is so overrated." As President Xi Jinping said, no system of governance is universal. No nation is superior to another, and no single country can dictate the course of world events. If that wasn't true and obvious before this week, it surely is now.